The till was $47 short, and Cait had been staring at it for 20 minutes when the black SUVs pulled into the parking lot. She knew it wasn't the late-night crowd. Hardie's kitchen closed at 10. The neon open sign had been switched off an hour ago, and the last of the line cooks had punched out and gone home to their apartments and their lives. This particular Parkdale side street didn't attract the kind of vehicles that arrived with tinted windows and low, predatory engines. Those were Bay Street cars, financial district cars. They had no business being here. Cait didn't run to the window. She set the cash tray back in the register and closed the drawer with her hip, the way she'd done 1,000 times since she was 14, learning this place from her mother's hands. The laminate counter was worn pale where elbows had rested for 30 years. The stools needed recovering. The overhead fluorescents buzzed on the left side, and nobody had fixed them in 6 months because the man who used to fix things was gone, and the woman who'd called him was gone too, and what was left was a diner with a $312,000 debt attached to its deed like a tumor nobody talked about. The back door rattled, then the front. 4 men came in through the front. 3 of them moved the way men move when they've been paid to stand between their employer and inconvenience. Shoulders squared, eyes cutting to the back hallway, reading the room for threats that weren't there. The 4th man walked differently. He didn't swagger. He just occupied space as though the air around him had agreed to make room. Lachlan Stroud was exactly what the East End whispered he was, which was rare. Most of what the East End whispered was exaggeration. Stroud wasn't. He was tall in the way that has nothing to do with height and everything to do with the economy of his movements. Nothing wasted, nothing careless. He wore a charcoal suit that had been made for him specifically, and he'd worn it into a greasy spoon at 11 at night without the slightest indication that he noticed the discrepancy. His hair was close-cut, silvering at the temples. There was a scar along his jaw that hadn't got there by accident. He stopped at the counter. His men fanned out behind him. The one closest to the door, Torrance. She'd heard the name before, connected to 2 separate incidents she didn't want to know more about, kept his hand loose at his side and his eyes on the back hallway. Stroud looked at the open register, then at Cait. "You're short," he said. His voice was a low, flat baritone, unpolished. $47, she said. "I've been trying to account for it." Not the till. He reached into his jacket and produced a folder, which he set on the counter between them. "Your mother's account. $312,000, accumulated interest included. As of this morning, it belongs to my family's holding company. Your bank sold it." Cait looked at the folder. She didn't touch it. She already knew its contents the way you know about a crack in a foundation, not from looking at it, but from feeling it every time you walked across the floor. Her mother had borrowed from a man named Gellan, who had run the East End before Stroud consolidated everything into something that wore tailored suits and filed clean corporate returns. The debt had outlived Gellan. It had outlived her mother. It had followed Cait into every early morning, every late night, every quiet conversation with her bank manager that had ended in polite, institutional regret. "I can't pay it," she said. The words were flat and honest and cost her something. "You can take the commercial equipment. The walk-in cooler's practically new. The range is worth a few thousand. The building lease has 8 months left. That's everything there is." Stroud's expression didn't change. He reached back into his jacket and placed a small box on top of the folder, black velvet. The 3 men behind him went completely still. "I need a wife," Stroud said. The fluorescents buzzed. Cait looked at the box. She looked at Stroud. She waited for the part where she'd misheard him, and it didn't come. "My operations are expanding into Vancouver," he continued, his tone level and matter-of-fact, as though he were reading aloud from a quarterly report. "The families I'm negotiating with, old names, old money, very old suspicions, they don't trust a man with no domestic anchor. They read it as volatility, a liability." He nudged the box a fraction of an inch toward her. "You sign the agreement. You attend functions, dinners, specific sittings. You maintain the appearance. In exchange, the debt resolves. This building becomes yours, free and clear, security you haven't had in 2 years. For 3 full seconds, Cait felt $312,000 lift off her chest like a physical pressure releasing. Heat in winter, a bank balance that didn't make her stomach clench, no more lying awake doing arithmetic that always came out the same wrong number. Then she looked at his men, Torrance, watching her, 2 others by the door, faces professionally blank. He'd brought an audience on purpose. She understood then what this was, not a proposal, an ambush dressed up as an offer. He'd brought witnesses to ensure she felt the full weight of her position, to make the alternative feel impossible. He expected her to grip the counter edge and nod, pale with gratitude, because what woman drowning in inherited debt turns down a lifeline, even one that comes with a chain attached? Cait reached out and slid the velvet box back across the counter. She pushed it past the folder, past the worn spot where generations of elbows had rested, until it reached the edge, and Stroud caught it just before it fell. "No," she said. The word sat in the diner the way a dropped glass sits on a tile floor, the echo of it hanging before the shock of what it meant landed. Torrance's chin came up a fraction. One of the men near the door shifted his weight. Stroud's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand what the alternative looks like." "I understand it exactly." Cait came around the counter. She wasn't hurrying. She just needed to be on the same side of it as him when she said this. "You bought a dead woman's debt and you walked into her daughter's kitchen at 11 at night with 3 men at your back, expecting me to cry with relief. You think $312,000 purchases a person." She crossed her arms. "It doesn't. Not this one." "Watch your mouth," said the younger man by the door, Hess, lean and twitchy, taking a step forward. Cait didn't look at him. "You want a fixture," she said, her eyes on Stroud. "Something to install in a chair beside you at formal dinners so the old money stops asking questions. You don't want a partner. You want something you can point to and say, 'This is my stability,' without having earned a single piece of it." She reached past him and flipped the folder open, turned to the second page, the numbers, and dropped it back on the counter. "Your terms are a transaction, and I'm not inventory." Stroud's jaw tightened. A muscle moved beneath the old scar. "Keep the box," Cait said. "Keep the debt. Walk out the door. If you want the equipment, send someone in the morning with a van, but I won't sell myself to clear a ledger I didn't write." The kitchen hummed with the sound of the refrigeration units. Outside, a streetcar rang its bell on Queen Street, 4 blocks west. Stroud looked at her for a long moment. His face gave nothing back. Then he looked down at the open folder, at the column of figures she'd pointed to. "You found it in 15 seconds, he said. "Found what?" "The interest calculation." He touched the page. "It's compounded at the wrong rate. My accountant applied prime plus 3. The original note reads prime plus 2. He looked up. "You'd been holding this folder for 15 seconds. Cait said nothing. Stroud turned and looked at Torrance. "Wait outside." Torrance blinked. "Boss?" "All of you, outside." A pause heavy enough to weigh something. Then Torrance jerked his chin at the others, and the 3 of them moved out through the front door. The bell above it rang twice. The parking lot went quiet. Stroud was still at the counter. He reached up and worked the buttons of his cuffs free, first one, then the other. He began rolling his sleeves past his forearms. There was a faded scar on his left arm that Cait hadn't noticed before, long and jagged, the kind that comes from a blade rather than an accident. "What are you doing?" Cait asked. He didn't answer. He walked around the counter. She moved aside, more from surprise than any impulse toward deference, and looked at the dish rack, still full from service. He turned on the hot water. He picked up the scrubbing brush. "The original notes rate has been compounding incorrectly for 22 months, he said, running water over the first stack of plates. "How much does the difference represent?" Cait watched him. A man who ran a syndicate stretching from Toronto to Montreal, whose name made bank managers careful and city councillors nervous, was standing in her mother's kitchen in a $3,000 suit, washing dishes. $18,400 and change, she said finally. 18,462. He set the first plates in the drying rack. That's how much my accountant has been overcharging your mother's estate. She's dead. She doesn't have an estate. No, he picked up the next stack. She has you. He worked through the backlog her cooks had left. He didn't do it badly. He did it with the same quiet economy he seemed to bring to everything, methodical and silent. The suit jacket was still on. The sleeves were rolled to the elbow. Soap was getting on his cuffs, and he hadn't acknowledged it. Cait stood back and watched, and couldn't decide what to do with what she was seeing. My father ran a bakery, Stroud said eventually. His voice had changed. Not softer exactly, but stripped of the layer that usually sat over it. Blore and Dufferin. He built it for 11 years. When I was 13, a development company started buying the block. He couldn't afford a lawyer. He lost the lease 6 months later. He turned off the water and dried his hands on a clean cloth. The men who took it from him didn't look like me. They wore better suits. They had business cards. The law was entirely on their side. He set the cloth down. I know what I am, Miss Hardie. I'm not asking you to call it something it isn't. Cait looked at the photo taped beside the pass-through window. Her mother, flour on her hands, laughing at something off-frame. She'd taped it there herself the week after the funeral and hadn't been able to take it down. Then why come here with the ring, she asked. If the rate is wrong, why not just send a corrected statement? Because a corrected statement doesn't tell me what I need to know. Which is what? He looked at her directly. Whether you're someone who can be trusted with the actual numbers. Cait frowned. I run a diner with a dishwasher that needs a new pump. You were in that folder for 15 seconds and found an error my senior accountant has been filing past for 22 months. He picked up his jacket from the prep counter. The Vancouver expansion involves 3 legitimate companies. 2 of them need someone with financial oversight who won't ask the wrong questions and can't be bought by the wrong people. I needed to know whether you'd fold under pressure before I could ask you anything real. He held her gaze. I had my answer in 30 seconds. Cait stared at him. That was a test. The ring was real, he said. Both offers were real. I needed to know which one you'd take. And if I'd taken the ring, then you'd have been useless to me professionally, and I'd have sent the van in the morning. She was furious, and she couldn't decide what part of it made her angrier, the manipulation or the cold, clear logic underneath it that she couldn't argue with. Get out of my kitchen, she said. He went. 2 days passed. She opened the diner at 6, ran service until 10, and went over the folder twice. The error was exactly where he'd said. She found 2 more in the supplementary pages he'd left behind. She sat with both of them and felt something that was equal parts cold rage and professional satisfaction, and she couldn't prize the 2 apart, no matter how hard she tried. On the 3rd evening, they came. 2 men, just before close, when the last table was clearing out. They didn't look at the menu. The taller one had a tattoo climbing his forearm into his sleeve, and the restless, under-rehearsed energy of someone delivering a message for the first time. Tell Stroud we found his errand, he said. He picked up the salt shaker and set it back down, hard, like he was making a point. Tell him Devereux says the East End is being restructured. He should make himself easy to reach. You have the wrong address, Cait said. We watched him leave here 3 nights ago. The second man moved toward the counter. You pass the message along, or we pass it ourselves. He's right behind you, said a voice from the kitchen doorway. Stroud stepped out from the back. He was in dark work jeans and a canvas jacket. No tie, no suit. He'd come in through the alley entrance. He held nothing. He didn't look angry. He looked the way a man looks when a predictable thing has finally arrived and he'd been waiting patiently for it. What followed was not long. It was not elegant. It was quiet and quick and finished in the time it would have taken Cait to call for help on a phone. Both men were on the floor and Stroud was standing over them, with his chest rising and falling steadily, his jacket torn at the shoulder, a cut along his left forearm bleeding through the canvas. Tell Devereux the East End isn't on the table, Stroud said. Tell him in person. If I have to send the message a second time, he won't have anyone left to hear it. They left, one of them helping the other, the bell above the door ringing in their wake. Stroud stood in the middle of her diner and looked at his arm. Cait was already moving. She came out with the first aid kit she kept on the shelf above the employee coats, the same shelf her mother had kept it on, and she set it on the counter. "Sit down," she said. Stroud looked at the kit, then at her. There was something in his face she hadn't seen in the previous two encounters. Not surprise, more like a man who has spent a long time being absolutely certain of what comes next, confronted with something that isn't it. "You don't need to. You're bleeding on my floor." She pulled the stool out from under the counter. "Sit." He sat. She worked the sleeve up. The cut was 4 inches, deep and straight from something sharp. She'd stitched her own hand twice, once in a kitchen fire, once when a mandolin caught her wrong, and she kept the kit for it. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic without apologizing for the sting, because he didn't flinch. "Torrance isn't outside tonight," she said, threading the curved needle. "I checked. I sent him home. So you came yourself." I had a feeling Devereux would move sooner than expected. He watched her hands work without looking away. "I came to warn you they were here before I could. You used this place as a location they'd come to." "No." His voice was steady. "I came to warn you. I didn't count on them arriving the same hour." A pause. "I'm sorry for that." The word sat between them, like something that had slipped out of his pocket without his meaning to lose it. Cait drove the needle through and said nothing for a moment. "My mother borrowed that money because she thought she could fix the margin problem herself," she said, tying off the first knot. "She thought one investment would turn things around. It didn't. Then she was sick, and she kept the debt from me, and by the time I found out how bad it was, she couldn't explain all of it anymore." She clipped the thread. "I've been carrying her hope for 2 years, the weight of what she owed, not even what she did." Stroud was quiet. "You said the men who took your father's bakery wore better suits than you do," she said, moving down the cut. "But you became the man in the suit." "Yes. And you're at peace with that." "I'm not at peace with it." His voice was flat, not defensive. "I'm honest about it. Those are different things. The men who took my father's business slept fine because they had justifications. I don't sleep fine. I know what the ledger actually costs and who pays it." He looked at the wall, at the photograph of her mother. "That's the only distinction I've got. It's not a good one, but it's real." She finished the stitching, 7 sutures, even and close, and wrapped the forearm in gauze. "I found 2 more errors in your accountant's filings," she said. Stroud looked at her. 31,000 across 3 separate accounts, same compounding period. She pressed the bandage flat and secured the end. "Your senior accountant is either incompetent, or he's been taking small amounts from multiple lines and counting on nobody running the numbers by hand." She pulled her hands back. "I ran them by hand." The diner was very quiet around them. Stroud stood. He looked at the wrapped arm for a moment, then at her, with the particular expression of a man recalibrating something. "I have to go deal with Devereux." "I know. This gets worse before it's resolved." He picked up his torn jacket from the counter. "Don't open until I tell you it's clear. Torrance will be on the block. I have breakfast service at 6. Then Torrance will be there at 5:30. He held her gaze, and there was an exhaustion in it, she recognized. Not physical tiredness, but the particular fatigue of someone who has spent a long time being certain of everything and has recently become uncertain of something important. "I know I have no right to ask you to wait for anything. I know how I came in here the first night, what I put on the counter and what I called it. I know exactly what that was." "What was it?" He was quiet for a beat. "Fear," he said. "I needed someone I couldn't buy, and I tried to buy them anyway because it's the only language I've spoken fluently in 15 years. He moved toward the back door. "I'm working on the translation." He went out through the alley. The door closed quietly behind him. 4 days. She ran service in the mornings and went over his numbers in the evenings, building the file a page at a time, finding things she suspected she wasn't supposed to find so easily. Torrance appeared at 5:25 every morning and vanished before the first customer arrived. On the second day, she brought him a coffee. Not Tim Hortons, the real stuff from the machine she kept for herself, and a breakfast sandwich wrapped in paper. He took both without quite making eye contact, which she took as gratitude. On the fourth evening, she drove to Bay Street. She parked her hatchback between 2 cars worth more than her debt and walked into the lobby of a glass tower in her work clothes, chef's coat and all, because she'd come straight from service, and she was finished waiting, and she was finished adjusting herself to fit the frame of somebody else's setting. The receptionist on the executive floor looked at her with the careful, trained blankness of someone who has learned to see everything and react to nothing. "Lachlan Stroud," Cait said, walking past the desk toward the heavy oak doors at the end of the hallway. "Tell him it's Cait Hardie. Tell him I have his accountant's complete file and a proposal." The receptionist reached for the phone. 2 minutes later, the oak doors opened from the inside. The boardroom was full, 8 men in suits arranged around a long mahogany table, the smell of expensive coffee and quiet, concentrated money. Stroud was at the head of it. He looked like he hadn't slept in 4 days. He looked up when she walked in, and every hard, closed line in his face shifted into something she couldn't name but felt, the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm arrives. He raised one hand. "We're done for today," he said to the room. "Everyone out." A silver-haired man at his left started to object. Stroud didn't raise his voice. He just waited, and the man read something in the silence and closed his leather binder. They cleared the room in under 90 seconds. Cait set the folder on the mahogany table. It was thick. She'd been building it for 3 days, cross-referencing account numbers against the public filings she could access legally, tracing the pattern she'd found in the first 2 errors out through 8 years of statements. "Your senior accountant's name is Aldous Price," she said. "I know his name. He's been running a skim for 8 years. Small, consistent withdrawals across 3 accounts, always below the threshold that triggers automatic review. It's 44,000 this calendar year alone, and it runs much further back." She turned the first page toward him. "I can show you exactly where it is." It wasn't hidden particularly well. He was counting on no one checking the figures manually. She met his eyes. No one was until 4 days ago. Stroud looked at the folder. He looked at her. "You could have sent this," he said. "I could have," she agreed, "but I wanted to say the rest of it in person." He waited. "I don't want the debt resolved as a transaction," Cait said. She rested her forearms on the mahogany, his mahogany in his tower, 40 floors above everything she owned, and kept her voice level. "I don't want to be on your payroll as a domestic convenience, and I don't want a ring that means you bought me out of a corner." She pushed the folder to the center of the table. "I want a contract, a real one. Financial consulting, full account review, access to whatever I'm assigned. Market rate, paid quarterly. No social clauses, no domestic conditions, no ambiguity about what I am and what I'm not." She paused. "In exchange, I will find every cent Price has taken going back to the beginning. I will build you an accounting system that cannot be skimmed by anyone, including me, and I will tell you every time I think you're wrong, in plain language, without softening it first." Stroud said nothing. "The debt becomes a line item we resolve through the fee schedule over 18 months, she continued. "Or you take the kitchen equipment. Your choice. But it's a business decision, settled on a spreadsheet, not a personal one." She sat back. "I'm not your liability, and I'm not your asset. I'm a contractor with a skill set you need. Those are my terms." The boardroom was very quiet. 40 floors below, the city carried on without them. Stroud reached into his jacket. He set the velvet box on the mahogany table between them. He didn't open it. "It was my grandfather's," he said. "He gave it to my grandmother when he had nothing. She kept it when they had less than that. I've carried it for 6 years. He looked at the box, then at her, and there was nothing calculated in his face anymore. Just the long, stripped-down honesty of a man who has run out of methods and is left with something simpler underneath. I'm not putting it on the table as a transaction. I'm putting it on the table so you know that when I say I want more than a contractor, I mean it without a ledger attached. Cait looked at the box. She looked at him. You still need a new accountant first, she said. Something cracked in the stone of his expression. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the thing that lives underneath a smile, which is quieter and less practiced and means considerably more. I know someone, he said, who just became available. Cait pulled the velvet box across the mahogany and set it in front of her. She didn't open it. She didn't hand it back. She left it there between her elbow and the folder while she turned to the first page of the accounts and picked up her pen. Show me the Vancouver files, she said. We'll start there. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread below them in all its cold, lit-up autumn glory, and somewhere in Parkdale, a diner sat dark and quiet with its worn counter edges and buzzing lights, waiting the way things worth keeping always wait, patient and certain and ready to be chosen.